So do you have to do that hot section? Do you have to do an overhaul? What about whenever the mechanic says you must do this thing, whatever it happens to be? Well, let's say you're going to sell your airplane. The pre-buy comes back with airworthy items, recommended items, and items you just need to know about. What's that really mean? Well, today we're going to have your answer. Today I've got Kenneth Hale with me. Kenneth is the Director of Maintenance for Casey Aviation Services. Pretty much my right hand here when it comes to aviation maintenance stuff, and the go-to guy with Casey Aviation Services. Welcome. I'm glad to have you a part of the Malibu Guru podcast.
Thank you, Joe, for having me again.
Yeah, it's kind of fun. Yeah, it's there's a couple fun things. Number one, I'm wearing Casey Aviation Services shirt. I got my first shirt, so it's like I'm legit now, and repping the brand correctly, and that's for sure. And maintenance, how's it going? We've been alive now for 9 months. Give the elevator speech. How are we doing?
It's been a ride. We have been full bore blast since day one of opening, which has been it's been a real blessing. It's been a blast, but things are great. The guys are learning, and we're improving every day and growing every day, and hopefully getting ready to expand. So,
yeah, one of the good problems we've got right now is we've got plenty of demand. Like the market has been so nice to us, and it's a great problem to have. It's been so good. We built the hangar next door, or redid the hangar, refurbished. I don't know, made it really nice. I don't know what the right word is. Renovated the hangar next door, and it's beautiful and it's lovely. But there's a problem in that we now have a Garmin dealership coming to coming to Lufkin, and so your hangar is about to become an avionics shop, which we'll have more about that real soon. And we are moving everything to we acquired another hangar, a really big hangar. So we're in the throes of moving stuff down. So it's been a lot of fun, but we're getting you more square footage, more space, more opportunities. We're hiring people, and it's just been kind of fun. I'm not kind of fun. It's been an absolute blast.
It's been a blast, trying to keep on pace, keeping the team growing and the facilities growing at the same rate that we're receiving customers it's been a challenge, but it's been a great challenge to have.
I've wanted to open up a maintenance shop for years and years and years, and I never had the right guy. That's why we didn't do it. With you, we got the right guy, and it's so fun. Like we get along, you and me, like we have no troubles. I don't think we've had a crossword yet.
Nope.
And as far as this is concerned, but also we had to get the right person with some PA46 experience that knows what they're doing. And it's just been a lot of fun because we're able to control the maintenance, which we haven't never been in control. We've had good maintenance from really good vendors, but we never were able to control that maintenance. Now we can control it, which is, we're able to control the flow and the when a certain item gets done, and we get to help you figure out, as you manage the shop, figure out which one has priority, which one has a bigger need. And it's been a lot of fun just to be able to have some control and be able to make this happen.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It has been.
Yeah. Okay, one more thing. We got M-Class coming up here real soon. I just want to make sure everybody knows about it. We're almost to 50 people, and I think it's 37 airplanes that are coming, PA46 airplanes, and one Cirrus jet. I had a Cirrus jet owner call me up and basically say, I'm coming, but I'm bringing my Cirrus jet. And I was like, bring it on. We'll let that show up, and it'll be just fine. But I'm glad that they're coming. It's from a pilot that used to fly an M600, moved up to I don't know if it's a lateral move or a move up, but anyway, he moved to a Cirrus jet. And but he's still going to be here, so I'm pretty excited about it. We got a lot of people coming that don't own a PA46 but want to, and we have a gob of PA46 owners, and we're really putting our best foot forward here. Everybody on our team, we've had meetings. We're leaning into this. We've got Mike Nichols with PMOPA, the CEO of PMOPA, coming. I bet we're over 50 people and over 35 airplanes here that are PA46s. So it's just going to be a good event. So. Anyway, I'm excited. I think you are as well.
I'm very excited.
Yeah, and you're doing some teaching on this too.
Yes.
which I'm excited about because I don't have to do all the teaching. No, but it's going to be good. We're going to have a maintenance portion of it dedicated to maintenance questions. We're going to bring people over to the hangar, to the maintenance hangar, let you teach them, and I just think it's going to be a whole lot of fun.
Yeah, I always look forward to working face to face with prospective and current customers. So it's always a really good touch point.
That's right. It's April 9th and 10th, with April 11th as a rainout day. That's a Thursday, Friday. And Thursday night we have a little get-together reception, little thing that we're doing on the night prior. So if you want to come the night prior, come on. It'll be a whole lot of fun. That's for sure. So that'd be a great event. It's coming up real soon in April, and I hope that works out well. But I'll tell you what, we got a gob of people that have asked questions about what maintenance is required. Should I do this? Should I not do that? And really this stems from a cool guy named Alexander Pitchler from Europe. And Alexander does a whole bunch of buying and selling of airplanes. He's one of the broker people that we have a relationship with. In other words, it's totally separate companies, but if we find an airplane that's in Europe and we want to let him know about it, he lets us know us about it. So it works out really well. And he had a bunch of questions about maintenance, which led us into all these other ones. We're going to tackle every bit of this today and basically put you on the hot seat and say, is this required or is that required? And this is going to be a lot of fun.
Yep, I think it will be because it's a little subjective here in the United States, and it really doesn't get spoken about enough, especially to the owner-operator.
Right.
I know us maintenance guys talk about it quite a bit because it's kind of an area that's in flux a lot of the time, but I think it's a really good topic to speak on.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's just dive right down. Let's just dive right on in. Airplane comes in for an annual inspection. You're going to have to do an inspection in accordance with Part 91, basically, that states that it's a Part 91 airplane. It has to have an annual inspection. But there's other things that you have to do as well. Now, let's just say somebody brings you a Malibu. What are you going to do?
Well, we're going to do what is required in the maintenance manual and by Part 91 Appendix D. The Appendix D specs out specifically what inspections, and Appendix D is a bare minimum inspection checklist. And I mean, whenever I say bare minimum,
which would apply to an Aranca Champ, a Piper Cub,
exactly, a blimp, an airship. I kid you not, there's still verbiage in the FAR speaking about gas bags and envelopes and, I mean, dirigibles and blimps.
Right.
It is...
If it's an aircraft, that applies to it.
Correct. It's rather antique and very broad. So the minimum inspection you're going to do is in accordance with Appendix D. So what we do is we make sure that the Piper checklist meets the requirements of Appendix D. We modify the Piper checklist a little bit because some of the things that they do ask you to do are a little overbearing or repetitive for what we've seen in the field, such as the fuel tank inspections every 2 years. I've never actually found anything except for damage that previous mechanics made because they were opening the tanks every 2 years, leaving rags and tools and flashlights and such in the tanks. Wow. So over maintaining the airplane is actually causing more issues, which drives you to do the inspections more often. Whereas if you just leave it and kind of Hippocratic Oath style, do no harm, well, you use your eyes, you inspect the airplane. For fuel tanks, you're inspecting the fuel filters to see if there's a need to open the tank. And if the need arises, then you do so.
Right. There is a thing about doing too much maintenance.
Yes. Over-maintaining an airplane is bad. It wears parts out from constant removal and installation, and it actually accelerates wear on parts. Tire changes and brakes and open and access panels you don't need to. There were a couple of airlines that did studies in the 80s and 90s on that exact topic and learned that they were wearing the airplanes out ahead of schedule by over-maintaining them. So they actually rolled back and worked with the manufacturers to fix some of those things.
Right. And a manufacturer is going to create a maintenance manual based upon what they think that maintenance manual need or what that airplane needs in terms of maintenance? And does it become the law?
Yes and no. And that very much depends on how they write their manual and how they drive you to do those inspections. In a Part 91 piston or turbine single, the answer is yes and no. On the airframe, it will be recommended items in a special inspections workbook or work chapter. But the engine and propeller get maintained in accordance with the manuals that go with those articles.
Meaning, if I've got a Continental Malibu, I've got a Continental Malibu. I got a document created by Continental that's going to tell you what you need to do to that particular engine.
Correct.
And the Piper manual is going to refer to this, saying you got to look at what you're doing there.
Correct. Yeah. The Piper manual will give you inspections to perform on the engines, either the Continental Lycoming or the PT6, and they'll tell you how to do the basic inspections, but they will always refer you to the manufacturer's manual for the rest of the data. And for the rest of the data means for the specific inspections which must be carried out. And
that really helps Piper in the sense that things can change on an engine as far as requirements for that particular engine, because that engine may receive service letters, service bulletins, things that change, maybe a different bracket or a rerouting of a thing, or in other words, things change on that engine over the years. The way it was done in 1989 with a Lycoming engine that was bolted on an airplane in 1989, today it's done a little bit differently. Although it's the same engine, there's been improvements and modifications that make it better.
Correct. Now, to touch on that aspect, the requirement is to use a manual that is current as of the production of the aircraft. That is the minimum responsibility of an A&P. So that means that if you have a 1984 Malibu and you have a matching 1984 paper manual revision original, that's all you would have to maintain.
That's an acceptable document to work from.
Exactly. And that is a perfectly acceptable for Part 91 operation to do that. You are by no means bound to work to the highest revision manual to maintain the aircraft.
Okay. So now we've just entered into a little gray area.
Correct.
So the point being, I think one of the things we're going to come from this is there are gray areas.
There are lots of gray areas.
Okay.
And that's what kind of makes pre-purchase inspections and annuals a minefield between facilities, is because it really comes down to what is the interpretation of the FARs and the maintenance manuals to the individual reading them at that moment. Because there's so much data to process that your opinion can vary. Even myself, whenever we're doing a pre-purchase inspection, I have to take a step back and be very subjective to what the requirements are, so that way I can be sure that we're doing the correct thing. And, heaven forbid, if you get sued or anything else, that you are in the right.
You're in compliance with the manual that tells you what to work. You're not doing it because it's your opinion.
Correct. And maintenance is not an opinionated area by any means. It is as black and white as it should be. You should be able to follow along the FARs. The FARs tell you which manual you're going to follow, and then you take both of those and you action the airplane. There should be no opinion whatsoever whenever it comes to airworthiness determination.
Gotcha. If if somebody's buying an airplane and they put it into pre-buy with Casey Aviation Services, and we're going to do this pre-buy inspection, which oftentimes is an annual inspection.
Correct.
Okay. Which, matter of fact, that's the best way to do it, is just do an annual inspection. That gives you the ability to look into the most stuff.
And it gives you an infinite work scope, which as a buyer is what you want, because as a buyer, you want to see as much of, Mirage is $750,000, $800,000 up to $1 million, and then the turboprops go for more than that. You want to see as much of that initial investment as you can before you take.
And even as a maintenance shop, you would rather do an annual inspection for the pre-buy. And the reason why is you now have the ability, when you say, yes, this is a good airplane, your scope is not limited that you got to look at, and you just feel better because you did an annual inspection. There's not an asterisk at the end of the.
Not only that, but legal compliance wise, there's no such thing as a pre-purchase inspection in the regulations anywhere. It is
Correct.
not a true inspection.
It can be as minimal as a walk around or a video. I mean, you could do a FaceTime.
You could do it over FaceTime. You could do it through pictures. You could legally just do a logbook review and call it a pre-purchase.
Or you can, that's on one end of the spectrum. All the way to the other end of the spectrum is going to be an annual inspection.
Correct. Now, the difference is in an annual inspection, you are driven to, so if the buyer drives me to do an annual inspection, they pay for an annual inspection, I'm going to complete the annual inspection. Now, the difference is if there's unairworthy items and there's a disagreement, then those unairworthy items get handled differently and the airplane becomes deemed unairworthy until those items are fixed. In a pre-purchase inspection, without doing an annual, this is where things get a little more awkward, is because as a mechanic, you're being asked to inspect an airplane, and then if you find anything that is an airworthiness or serious defect, in some situations, you can be asked to close up the airplane and sign off the work that you performed. And that creates some
Because if you find something that you just can't close it up with.
Well, and in that situation, you would be expected to, because you did not perform an airworthiness inspection as listed in the FARs.
Yeah, so even a little more gray area.
Yeah, and that's more of a moral impingement on the mechanic than it is anywhere else, because it is just a moral issue for a mechanic to find a major flaw in an aircraft and then turn around and release it to service. It's
we worked
wrong.
We worked with a maintenance provider that I'll leave unnamed, although they did great. And because we had an aircraft, a PT6 driven aircraft, and it was at a maintenance facility. And basically we were like, we want to get a one-time flight to move it to where we are so that we can do the work that needs to be done on it. And basically the guy, it was not an annual inspection, but the guy, it was at a pre-buy, and basically the mechanic said, I don't think you should do this. And we were like, well, why not? And he said, well, let me just show you. And he basically sent us a video where he did a full power run up and flames were coming out of the exhaust in this sporadic fashion, like, which clearly something's not right inside the, and basically the mechanic goes, something's not right. I don't know all that's not right in this particular engine, but something is not right, and I would not fly the airplane. And we basically said, I agree.
Right.
And there's a place where a mechanic can put his foot down and say, I am not going to say this airplane is, I don't want to see this airplane fly. I have seen something that I deem as being unairworthy. And, oh, by the way, I'm not going to sign a ferry permit that's going to go to the FAA either. And you have recourse, you have ramifications.
Very, very limited as spec'd out by the FARs. It's the owner-operator's responsibility to determine the airworthiness of the aircraft they're about to fly. And
once you have an annual inspection.
Once you have a phase or an annual or periodic or whatever that inspection was as designated, from that point on to the time of the next inspection, it is the owner-operator's responsibility to maintain airworthiness of that aircraft.
Gotcha.
Which means that the mechanic, even if I walked up to that aircraft and inspected it, even though it wasn't an official airworthiness determination, if I turn around and hand that list to the pilot and say, hey, I would not fly this, I can't do anything to ground that airplane.
Right. But if it's an annual inspection,
I could absolutely sign it off unairworthy, and they could get a ferry permit, take the list somewhere else, and have it fixed. Now, the kicker is I signed off the annual, so it's in annual. It's just not airworthy. So the owner can take that list of items, go to another shop, only have those list of items repaired, and it's in annual without that mechanic signing off the annual.
Interesting.
Which is why I prefer annuals, is because you're going to be allowed to complete the scope of the inspection, whether what you find is bad or not, and the annual will get signed off. I mean, it's more of a closure thing. You've completed the inspection, found the issues, written them up, and they go to the appropriate place to get actioned.
An owner of an airplane sort of feels like every annual they feel like they're held hostage.
Yes.
And they are. And there's no way around. I mean, there's just ways around it. You just articulated one. But at the end of the day, when somebody drops off their airplane for an annual inspection, it really does come to the trust of the shop and the leadership of that shop to be able to determine what's airworthy, what's not, and what they're going to allow and not allow. And there are some shops that simply say, this is airworthy and that's all there is to it. You're not going to get it out of there unless you are. You are in a bit held hostage in the sense that you got to fix those problems. They have to articulate why that is an airworthy item, but they should be able to go right back to a maintenance manual that says, no, you really do need to do this inspection for this to be airworthy.
Correct. Yeah, my mentor taught me it's you once you figured out what the problem is now it's time to put on your lawyer cap and justify. Because if you can't justify it, you don't have to do it.
Right. Agreed. And the other side of this whole thing is you want a shop that has a fair level of compliance is maybe not the right word. In other words, when I pick up an airplane from annual, I want a good annual.
Correct. Basically, you want a standard above minimum compliance is what you want. You can do minimum compliance on these airplanes, and you would probably have it'll be a safe airplane. It won't be top reliability. It won't be as compliant as it really should be or what the community, accepts as standard, but it would be legal. Now, and that kind of takes me back to Appendix D in 91. It's a minimum standard. And the FAA specs out a minimum standard for you to follow, but that is not the group you want to be in. You do not want to be the person at the bottom of the barrel doing the bare minimum,
right?
Especially in these aircraft.
Not in a PA46. I will maybe not really in other airplanes either, but I'm telling you, a PA46 that has languished with crappy maintenance for a good number of years, somebody's going to write a big check to get that airplane back up where it needs to be. Keeping an airplane at a high level of maintenance is a cheaper way to do it.
Correct. At the end of the day, it's pretty much going to be the same investment. Either you're going to spend the money each year or you're going to spend the money all at once. You just have to decide which way you want to go at it. Do you want to save the money until you go to sell it and spend all the money at the time of the pre-purchase, or do you want to just dole out the cash every year, keep your airplane up to snuff, and have a safer aircraft to operate and less expense whenever you go to move out of that airframe?
And that is why if you're buying an airplane, one of the ingredients in buying a good airplane is having a good seller. I cannot tell you how many times I've gone to a client. As a matter of fact, I tell people, if you're going to buy an airplane, there's three things you need to have a good deal on an airplane. You need to have a good buyer, a good seller, and a good airplane. If you got all that, this is going to go great. It's going to go fantastic. Right. If you have a crappy seller, a guy who goes, well, I'm not going to fix all those problems because I'm going to sell this airplane in the next 8 months, and I'm just going to let all this stuff not get done, try to sell the airplane and, that's not a good seller. A good seller is one that says, I want to sell a good airplane. I want this airplane to be at the top of its game because I don't want anything coming back on me as far as, I want to sell a good airplane. A good buyer does the same thing where they want to buy a good airplane and they want to pay the right price to be able to get a good inspection and get all. And if you got both of those, you're going to have a good airplane.
Right.
And that's when it just goes so wonderfully well. It just, a good buyer, a good seller helps just helps the whole thing to go well.
Yeah. And I will say that makes the sales transactions go substantially smoother as whenever, you've got a great seller, a great airplane, and a great buyer. It just smooth sailing.
We have one right now. It literally came a couple of days ago, dropped off his M600. You're doing an inspection on it here in just a little bit, but this is, I'm not going to mention his name, but I'm telling you, this guy's a class act, been hanging around him for 8 years plus. And I told the buyer, I said, this is the airplane you want, regardless of little nuanced things, because the seller's so good, you're getting a good airplane. He's going to perform in this transaction. If there's a problem, he's going to fix it. And it's just, anyway, cool people like that. Yep. That's who you want. That's who you want to build a business on, and those are the people that you want in your life in just every respect. And that's the person you want to buy an airplane from. So
right.
Okay, so let's start. So an airplane comes to you for an annual inspection. You're going to basically, when you look at that annual inspection, you're going to create what we call airworthy items.
Correct. Yeah. So in an annual inspection, we are tasked with making an airworthiness determination. So we're going to inspect the airplane, open it up, take it apart, go through the aircraft, find out what's wrong, and then we're going to make an airworthiness determination to see if those issues are an airworthiness concern.
And you're going to make another list, which is recommended.
Correct. A recommended list, which would be service bulletins, service letters, service instructions, vendor service bulletins, things such as those, which are not required, but they are recommended. And some of those, as a PA46 centric facility, we don't treat as recommended. We treat them as mandatory.
Okay, so let's talk about that, because you do have Piper service letters, service bulletins. I've never seen an airplane outside of warranty that had 100% compliance. I will tell you, there's some service letters and service bulletins that if I owned the airplane, I'm not doing them.
Correct.
And I don't have to, because service letters and service bulletins are not required, correct?
Correct. Even if it says mandatory in big red letters across it, like a lot of the Piper ones do, they are not required.
Because it comes from Piper.
Correct.
It's basically Piper saying, we are calling this mandatory, but Piper has no teeth.
And the way this works is, so Piper creates a service bulletin for an issue they know about. If the issue continues to run or grow, the FAA catches wind of it and they turn it into an AD. Now, whenever that happens, now it is FAA required, mandated, and they incorporate the service bulletin as approved data.
Correct.
And now that service bulletin is mandatory.
So service bulletins, some of them are really important, and you better follow it and you better do it. Some of them are just not that important, but they may become important. And so,
Correct.
like if we buy an airplane, one of the phrases we'll say, well, that's a good airplane. That one, the service letter and service bulletin compliance is very high on that airplane. The compliance is high. It basically means an owner said,
Do everything.
Do everything. And sometimes that's the flavor of that is good. Sometimes it's too much maintenance.
Correct. And there are facilities out there that do all the service bulletins and all the service instructions, all the service letters. But, in some of those ways, they're missing a lot of the other issues with the aircraft because they're spending so much time on things that aren't required that they miss things in the inspection. They're actually so over compliant that they're missing glaring issues elsewhere in the aircraft.
Correct. There is a place you need to be. Okay, so Alexander Pitchler with API Aviation, again, good friend of ours. We like him. He thinks if you're over in Europe, he's a good guy. Recommend him and all that kind of good stuff. Let me just ask some specific questions that he's asked us. FCU. Let's break it down. Let's say for a Meridian, do you have to do the FCU? And let me ask that, and then I want to jump in because I got a bunch to talk about this one.
Yeah, I would say no. It is not required. It is a recommended inspection interval, and it
recommended by the manufacturer.
Recommended by the manufacturer, Honeywell. And it is an aggressive recommendation. I think 6 years is just, that's short. It's just like the prop. 6 years is just a really short time span, especially for low utilization aircraft like the Meridian and jet prop that fly maybe 200 hours a year.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, it's an
Most
1,800 hour,
yeah.
1,800 hour midway or midlife bearing inspection is what they want you to do. So 1,800 hours or 6 years, and I don't know a single customer that has flown 1,800 hours in 6 years.
It used to be that a FCU overhaul would cost you less than $10,000. Certainly, easily less than $10,000. Even at that low rate, very few mechanics would do it. Would do an FCU. What they would do is take off the FCU, send it back to Honeywell or the manufacturer, and they would do a bench check, which would mean new bearings, and they would make sure it's not leaking, put it all back together, send it back to you. Well, now they pretty much figured out, hey, we're giving up all our money, basically. So they tripled the cost. It's now costing upwards of $35,000 to get an FCU overhaul, and they won't do any bench checks. But to me, it's a money grab.
So here's the other kicker. So if you have a Honeywell field control and you send it in for its first midlife bearing replacement inspection, its First one, you only get one ever. So here's the deal. You send it in, and say you send it in at 900 hours because you're 6 years in and somebody tells you have to send it in at 6 years. Well, you send that in. Well, that's your one cheap shop visit. So a midlife bearing replacement, I think last time I priced one was $22,000 and an overhaul was $38,000.
Oh my gosh.
So if you miss or you use up your one cheap shop visit because you didn't have a problem and you turn around and have a problem 500 or 600 or 800 hours down the road because your fuel pump fails or the fuel control has a problem or whatever, you've used up your cheap shop visit at that 6-year interval.
Right. And it gets very expensive from that point on. And the answer is, do you have to do an FCU overhaul? And the answer is
no.
There you go. And I will tell you, I have seen, this is purely anecdotal. It's Joe doodle. It means it has no scientific bearing because it's just me looking at the marketplace. But I see a lot of marketplace. I have seen a fairly high level of infant mortality on FCU overhauls, meaning you send it in, you get an FCU overhaul, it comes back, and it's not right.
If you look at those scenarios, if you went back and looked at them, a lot of times the fuel pump, the high pressure fuel pump that the fuel control is bolted to does not go with it. Whenever I do fuel controls, the fuel pump and the fuel control go as a pair, and they both get overhauled and they come back. A somewhat frequent problem on the Dash 42 is that high pressure fuel pump, this drive seal fails in between the fuel pump and the fuel control, and the fuel pump washes the bearings out of the fuel control. That's the most common reason for having to remove a fuel control outside of a scheduled inspection.
Right. And if you just don't touch it,
it'll be fine.
It'll be just fine.
Fuel controls talk to you if they have a problem.
Yeah.
They give warning signs. You'll have, at high density altitudes, they'll roll back. They won't hold idle settings properly, or they just won't start. I mean, if the engine doesn't start, there's your red flag right there, a PT6 that won't start. You better just walk away from it.
That's exactly right. Okay, so we got FCU. Let's talk about prop overhaul. Required, because these are on a 72-month, 6-year, or 3,000.
It is a 6-year recommended overhaul, and that's recommended from a 91 perspective based on the manual, and it's recommended based on how they worded it in the owner's manual for the Propeller as well.
Gotcha.
So it is not a true die-hard 6-year overhaul.
Right.
Now, shops will recommend, we do tear down, inspect, or IRAN, inspect and repair as necessary. I do like to see, especially turboprop propellers, reversing propellers, to come off at 10 years.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Yeah, you hit a play. And I will say, if you have your airplane near the ocean, meaning a high corrosive environment,
definitely more frequently.
And the reason why, because you can get corrosion inside the hub, because you get that salty water inside the hub where it can't get out. Now you get corrosion on your blades versus your hub, and you open it up, and all of a sudden you got to replace the entire thing, not just get an overhaul.
Yeah, and not only is that a safety issue, it is a expense issue. I mean, you really don't want to shortchange yourself. If you wait for the corrosion to get bad enough, the propeller may not come apart, but you may be buying 4 new blades or lots of hard parts at that overhaul, and it drives your cost of ownership.
Right. So if you're sitting in Arizona and you're in a low corrosive environment, you're flying 100 hours a year, and you hit the 6-year point, do you need to do an overhaul? And the answer is no. Right. In my opinion, unless there's an obvious reason to do it. But if there's not, let her roll. And when you hit 10 years is a Kennethism. Am I hearing that right?
Yeah, correct. It is a personal, I won't call it a standard, but it's something that I would recommend based on field experience. What I've seen in the field, whenever you send a propeller in and get a overhaul or an inspection performed on it, 10 years is about the limit to where things start getting expensive at an overhaul shop.
Okay, let's talk about O2 generators. I will tell you, I don't know what to do with this. You can help me out. O2 generators, I will tell you, if you've got the little 4-pack of O2 generators in the back of the airplane where you have a chemical reaction that occurs, you want to talk about a big, gigantic piece of crap. I think they're actually dangerous. There's a chemical reaction. You get heat. It's a lot of heat that can be generated. I just don't like them at all. Do you have to have them?
You have to have something. You can't just get rid of them and not have anything. It is a DOT Well, I won't say that. It is an FAR requirement under Part 91 for operation above, I believe it's 22,000 or 23,000 feet, to have a installed oxygen system for all passengers in the aircraft. So you have to have something. Now, the oxygen generators, they're good for 10 years. You spend $650, $700 a piece on them. There's 3 of them in the airplane. Relatively low cost of maintenance over a 10-year period. And on the flip side of that coin, you could have an installed oxygen bottle system for your passengers instead. But you have to have something if you're going to fly in those regimes, which the aircraft is certified for.
Right, and there are those little tiny bottles that you can also have inside there. There's things you can do that are better.
But you have to have something.
Something.
You either have to have oxygen generators that are in date, inspected, and airworthy, or you have to have a fixed oxygen bottle for your passengers that's inspected and airworthy.
Okay, good story. And let me say this: if you're flying in a Meridian at flight level 270, 280, you're up high, and you have an oxygen event, meaning you have a depressurization in the cabin. You need to, number one, you need to get down. But number two, you do want to have oxygen in the back of the airplane. Do your passengers right. Have some good stuff back there that they can really...
Right. You don't want to be rolling around with, 15 or 20-year-old oxygen generators where in case of emergency, you're not paying attention, tell the passengers, hey, don't grab that, and they put it on and it poisons them.
Yeah, exactly.
So you don't want to be in that position.
Okay.
You definitely want to have the right stuff.
Okay. Hydraulic power pack in a Meridian.
That's a hard no. That is a manufacturer's recommended item under Part 91 that's not required. I think it's kind of crazy, especially at the price of those units. I mean, those are almost $19,000 a piece now. So
huge money.
It's a huge expense for not a whole lot of gain. I mean, if you're keeping up with your hydraulic system and it operates, and I mean, they get inspected pretty heavily every year. They just don't need it. I mean, I've worked on airplanes with their original power pack with 4,000 and 5,000 hours, and I mean, there's just no reason to do that expense, especially with an emergency extension system that is as reliable as the PA46 has.
Okay, so now Alexander's over in Europe, and there are EASA airplanes that are, in other words, non-NREG airplanes that are over there. They do a lot of more maintenance than
they do everything.
They do everything.
It is the if you were to look at opposites, EASA and FAA, as far as general aviation is concerned, are bipolar opposites. The FAA is very much the manufacturer is setting what is mandatory, and in EASA, they don't have the gray areas. They just set forth and made everything required, whether it be a service bulletin or a service letter, any directive, any part of the manual. If it is a listed inspection, it is required. And I've got a customer that we deal with that. It's a San Marino registered. And I mean, every time a service bulletin comes out, we better go down there and knock it out because it has to be done for it to be airworthy.
Right. It's a different game if you're in Europe. Now, if you're in Europe and you have an NREG airplane, November registered, U.S. registered, U.S. rules apply. And but you also have to have a mechanic, an A&P, with inspection authorization over in Europe to be able to sign that off. And there are A&P IAs that are over in Europe, and you can own an NREG airplane in Europe and get it NREG maintained. And then you're going to follow the FAA rules.
Yeah, there's a couple of FAA certified repair stations over there in Europe for that very reason.
That's right.
Capable,
and
of
it is a
that.
good way to do it. There's some lower taxes. There's lower maintenance requirements. There's a lot of people that do an NREG airplane over in Europe. So for sure. Let's talk about airborne check valves.
Okay.
Do you have to do them? I
would say no. Again, especially on aircraft with the turkey poppers on the vacuum gauges,
right?
They'll talk to you, and you'll know you have a problem, and then you get them replaced. I don't think, they've got a 6-year replacement life. It's either 6 years or 10 years, and I've seen originals from '84 flying around. So,
okay,
Airborne actually came out and reduced back a lot of their replacement and overhaul intervals after they got sued several times in the 70s and 80s, and that's a result of. not because they're known to fail. It's just if you didn't do that inspection, you can't turn around and sue us.
Right. Let's talk about windshields for a second. I hate to open up that can of worms. It's a can. They're the worms. They're going everywhere. But let's talk about windshields for a minute, because we got a big windshield problem going on in aviation right now. We got a big problem because there's some airplanes, you just like a King Air. We got a King Air, couldn't get a windshield. We went 9 months with no windshield, still didn't get a windshield. We ended up buying a used windshield at triple the cost of a new windshield just to put in the airplane so we can get it flying. And we still haven't gotten that new windshield that we've been promised, and it's been 2 years. We got a windshield problem. In the PA46 world, we have windshield problems. You just can't find the windshield. So, but we also have from Piper that lovely service letter 1604, which basically says you got to look at the ohms for a windshield. And at the end of that, and they give the parameters for a brand new windshield.
And the brand new ones don't even pass.
And the brand new ones don't even pass. So if you're on, I basically have gotten to the place where service letter 1604 is almost a joke.
Correct. And that, that's, you have to read carefully these service bulletins for that very reason. Is it a realistic expectation? Is it a realistic reason to do maintenance? Is it really necessary, or are we just doing it because Piper's covering their butt? And some of that is what this is.
You know what happened on that? Which is kind of funny, because when that came out, everybody was like, no, service letter 1604 that applies, blah, 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 blah. And Piper didn't say a whole lot. But then they realized their aircrafts are under warranty for 5 years. And so what was happening is people were saying, hey, do service letter 1604 on my warranted airplane at 4 years or 3 years, and find out, that
gets a new windshield.
The ohms goes down, and now all of a sudden Piper gets to buy a brand new windshield. And it was like, well, I'm not sure we meant that much.
Exactly.
The point is, if you want to know what your windshield is, and actually Chad Minnie showed me this a long time ago. I don't know if it was his idea or if he just started doing it at Malibu Aerospace back when he was there. But take an infrared picture of the windshield and look at it. You can see exactly where it's heating up and exactly where it's not. You can do it on the ground. Your prop doesn't even need to be turning, but don't turn it on and leave it on for long. Okay, turn it on, take your picture, turn it off. But at the end of that, you can have a nice little picture of exactly where that windshield's heating up, and then look at it and go, is it heating in the right places? Is it doing good enough? You can literally have a Piper airplane come off the factory floor, and it's not going to be a perfect windshield. They deteriorate. Some of them deteriorate very quickly. And so we've ended up with this big problem in the world of PA46s as far as the windshield concerned. And basically, you send an airplane into pre-buy, and the buyer wants to know, does the windshield work? And the seller's like, I can't replace it anyway. We've gotten to the place where we basically say, let's pull out an infrared image and let's look at it. And if 50% of that's gone, well, you probably need to take 50% off.
Prorate the sale price of the aircraft by replacement cost.
That's about a $35,000 hickey. It's 50%. Let's take $17,000 off the value of the airplane. That's a layman's term. But again, you go back to maintenance on this. Do you have to replace the windshield?
And if you want it to be FEKI certified, yes, you would have to replace that windshield. So to keep from becoming a legal snafu, especially whenever you sign off an annual, you're not allowed to have inoperative equipment in Part 91. There's no such thing as an MEL in a Part 91 aircraft unless you go out and set forth.
Unless you have one applied to it.
Applied to it by the FAA, and that's quite the approval process. We've done that in the past, and boy, that's a nightmare. You don't want to go through that.
Yeah.
So there's no such thing as inoperative equipment at time of sign-off. Everything in the aircraft must work. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. Doesn't matter if it's a light bulb, a switch, a push button. You never use it. It's got to work under the expectations of the FARs.
So if you turn it on and I get amps.
Well, so if it's an inoperative windshield, which I've seen some that draw no amps
totally
burned out, you can placard the system and take the aircraft out of FEKI.
Right.
And that's another way to handle it. Now,
But
granted,
now you got a big old placard on the panel, and you can't go fly in the ice, which is no bueno.
correct. Right. That's correct. But it's you have to do it that way for legal protection, because that's your legal way to sign the airplane off.
All right. Agreed 100%. Let's say somebody comes to you with a Meridian. You're now going to go to find the maintenance manual for that particular Meridian, and you're going to follow it. Do you have to do everything?
No.
Okay. So talk to me about what you do and don't need to do.
The only thing that you're required to do in a Malibu through an M6, M700, which I haven't seen the M700 manuals yet, but I'm pretty confident they're the same. The only part you're required to do is Chapter 4, which is the Airworthiness Limitations section, which is the only part of that maintenance manual that is FAA approved.
Gotcha.
That's why we have FARs that tell us how to do annuals, is because if you look at Chapter 5, which what tells you what inspections you do when, it's not FAA approved. So that's why we have to go back. We have to make sure that the inspections they list actually comply with Part D of Part 91.
Gotcha. So it's a little confusing if you're an owner as far as that's concerned. And that's why if you bring your airplane, you probably need to have this talk. As what exactly are you going to do? Well, I'm going to follow the maintenance manual to the letter, and this is what this is how we're going to maintain this airplane.
And then on top of that, so again, you go back to, we're going to maintain it, in accordance with 91, and then 91 Appendix D, and then Chapter 4. And then on top of that, once we're past the bare minimum of maintenance, then we go on and we talk about things that are, I wouldn't say suggested, but required to do outside of what the FAA thinks are required. If I'm going to work on an airplane and if I'm going to be comfortable to sign it off, there are things that we're going to do because, starter generators do fail at 1,000 hours. I've seen them fail at 900 hours and 800 hours. Or, Dan Moran's airplane his was failing at 450 hours, I think is how early his was.
I talked to Dan just the other day, and his start temperatures are down about 100 degrees because he put a new starter on there, solved the problem.
Correct.
And now he's got nice, cool starts. There's not any trouble as far as that's concerned. It was the right answer.
So, backtracking to that, there are things that, even though they aren't listed as required, as a shop and as a maintenance facility and with experience, you look at and you will say are going to be required. Just because of the fact of the matter is they're consistently failing in a range.
Right. Okay, so let's talk about jet props. Somebody comes to you with a jet prop. Now, this is an airplane that legally, by FAA standards, is a PA46-350. It's a Mirage or a Malibu, could be, but we'll call it a Mirage. But it happens to have an STC applied to it.
Correct.
What do you do and what do you not have to do?
So a jet prop is an interesting case because you basically have two sets of manufacturer's instructions you're having to work with. You have Piper's, and then you have Rocket Engineering's inspection data as well. So a STC comes with what's called instructions for continued airworthiness. So that's what the IA, so myself or one of my other coworkers, would take out to the airplane, and that's what they're going to inspect that STC with. And that goes all the way down to a GPS antenna. GPS antennas have their own ICAs. I kid you not. Each single one, each common antenna.
So basically, if an airplane has an STC applied, that STC comes with instructions for continued airworthiness. ICA is another way to say it.
Correct.
They'll have ICAs, is the way you'd say it. And you have to follow the ICA
to the letter.
To the letter.
There is no deviation on ICAs. An ICA is a rigid document because it is a modification to the way that you inspect the original article.
Right. And so if the jet prop maintenance manual lists a thing that you got to do, you got to do it.
Correct. So in the way that the jet prop manual is written, it's very all-encompassing. In word for word here, Use the following inspection guide, but always refer to the latest Hartzell and Pratt & Whitney inspection information. If the Hartzell or Pratt & Whitney inspection requirements differ from those listed below, always use the most restrictive requirement.
So you're handcuffed to doing the most restrictive.
The most restrictive. And that means that everything that is listed out in their inspection document, if it says overhaul, you're going to be doing an overhaul. If it says inspect, you're going to be doing an inspection on whatever is listed in this list.
Yeah, but the list is not onerous. It's actually a decent list. Would you agree?
It's a very well worded document, and it's not what I would consider as overbearing. I would consider it as, some common sense items that you're going to be doing anyway.
Right. But so let me give you for instance, or let me get a for example. Does a jet prop owner have to do a hot section inspection?
Yes, if they are not doing continuous trend monitoring.
And you know what continuous trend monitoring is because
it's spec'd out in the service bulletin that the manual gives you.
There you go. So the point behind it is you can't just say, no, you don't have to do that because it has a trend monitor installed. You got to follow the service bulletin or service letter from Pratt & Whitney that now has a list of approved people that can provide the trend monitoring. And if the trend monitoring doesn't show it, then now you don't have to do a hot section inspection on time.
Correct. And that's the thing. You should always be able to backtrack this to a document that tells you why you have to do it. There will always be an avenue to get there to explain why, or a person to ask, or, even if you've got to phone your Fed and say, hey man, I've got this problem. I've got this mechanic telling me I've got to do this. Here's the manual. Here's the document. Can you give me some guidance here? I mean, that's what they're there for. I mean, that's the whole reason why we have Feds in the first place. I know it's not most people's first phone call they want to make,
right?
But it's a good one to make because it's CYA. I mean, not only on my part whenever I sign the aircraft off for return to service, but on the owner-operator's part, because insurance doesn't cover you if you're not airworthy and in compliance with the manufacturer's recommendations.
Right.
So at the end of the day, as an owner-operator, it should be your goal to be on track if the mechanic's telling you, hey, this is an airworthiness item and you got to do it, because at the end of the day, if you crash or you run the airplane into a hangar or whatever happens, if you're not in compliance and if the insurance company finds out, you will not be covered.
It is important. And it's not a blanket statement, because you can have one jet prop that has no trend monitor even installed. Guess what? You're going
to be doing a hot section every 1,800 hours.
It's not a blanket. And it's also, I've heard it said by you, I think this came from you, that Part 91 is not really the Wild Wild West. Meaning that Part 91 means that doesn't mean you can do anything you want to do.
Correct. It is a different set of operating rules that is less restrictive, but there are still rules. And Part 91 is an extremely long chapter. I mean, it's got a lot of regs in it. Even in my FAR AMT book, my goodness, there's a lot of regs in that chapter.
Right. So when somebody brings an airplane to a mechanic, not just you, but any mechanic, they're legally bound to open up Part 91. They're legally bound to open up the maintenance manual, legally bound to open up the ICAs for the STCs that are applied to the airplane and follow them.
Right.
And so it's not, this airplane might be different than that airplane, and that airplane might be different than this airplane in terms of what's bolted onto it, what applies exactly to it, because not every airplane's exact. The newer the airplane, it's easier because there's not very many changes. But if somebody wheels in here with a 1985 Malibu with a jet prop conversion on it, there's a lot of
there's a lot. And in the same way, Part 91 is not great, because if you move over to the other side of the house and you go to a multi-engine turboprop, those have a very specific set of regs in 91 that you must follow. And they get phase inspections. They don't get annuals. They get maintained in accordance with Chapter 4, which has all of the manufacturer's recommended items built into it, such as a King Air. The special inspection worksheet in a King Air is required, not recommended. It's all listed out super clear, but you're still in Part 91.
Right. And what it means is don't talk to your King Air buddy to figure out what you have to do on your M600.
It may not be such a great idea. You may spend a little bit more at your annual if you do that.
Right. But the point is that certain things apply, certain things don't. have a good mechanic that you can trust, have a good shop that you can take your airplane to. We're a great shop. As far as that's concerned, we'd love for you to bring it to us, but there's other good ones out there. But take it to a shop where you actually know the mechanic and you can talk to him and really figure out, what do I have to do? What do I not have to do? Having a reasonable mechanic that knows the regs and knows the airplane, absolutely critical.
Yeah, I mean, you really want a mechanic that can navigate the regs and the manuals and put the two together and do what is necessary and required to make sure you have a safe airplane at the end of the day, without doing extra stuff that you don't necessarily have to do, want to do, or need to do.
Talk to me about your maintenance team. Like you've been able to create a team here at Casey Aviation Services. Talk to me about what you've been able to create with them.
It has been a process to be able to go out and find individuals that want to learn how to work on aircraft and specialize. It's not exactly straightforward. Just go out and hang a shingle out and go find yourself an aircraft mechanic. It's quite a bit more involved than that. It's in some ways we're doing a grow your own A&P process, which a lot of the larger facilities have gone to, and in other ways we have hired a couple of licensed individuals as well. But we're trying to find individuals that want to be invested in what we work on, who we work with, and grow with the company, which has been fun. I've really enjoyed finding like-minded people that enjoy doing what we do every day and being good at it.
You know, when we first opened this, not everybody, but gobs of people told me, your number one problem is going to be finding good mechanics. And I will tell you, it has not been nearly as hard, in the sense that we've just seemed to have found some really good people. I'm convinced that you find that thoroughbreds like hanging around thoroughbreds, and that once you have a stable full of thoroughbreds, they know where the thoroughbreds are and they help find them and bring them in. It's been so much fun to see who's walked in our door, and because thoroughbreds hanging around thoroughbreds. And it's been fun to see, because if you look at the mechanics that we've got, they're not all the same. They're very different in a lot of ways, but boy, it just seems like a team effort, and just seems like a really great team.
Yeah, I mean, it is a team in essence. You've got members from all walks of life and all experience types, and everyone's got a very well-rounded toolbox of experience, if you will. We've all worked in different environments and places and came from different experiences. I think at the end of the day, that's helpful whenever it comes down to problem solving and growing.
Well, you know, a lot of people call me whenever they want to ask a question about PA46. A lot of people call you about PA46 stuff, and I want to encourage people to be able to do that as well. Go to the Casey Aviation Services website and connect with us. Kenneth is a wealth of information, as he's exemplified here on this podcast, and I appreciate you leading our team, being not only a part, but being the leader of Casey Aviation Services. And I'm really excited about the future of what we're doing here. And I'm excited because we get to help a lot of people in the PA46 world. You're doing a great job. I appreciate you being a part of it.
Well, I thank you guys for bringing me on board. It's been a blast the past couple of months, and I'm excited to see what's next. I mean, it's constant growth. That's exciting.
Right. Yeah, and we're hiring.
And we're always hiring.
So if you got somebody that needs a job or needs right, we're hiring right now. I hope you've enjoyed this edition of the Malibu Guru podcast to really understand what maintenance needs to be done, what doesn't need to be done, and hopefully just to be able to work with your mechanic to be able to really keep your airplane at a high level of maintenance. Owner involvement in the airplane is just absolutely critical, and having a knowledgeable owner is what we want to have here at Casey Aviation. And I hope you've learned something from the Malibu Guru podcast. Joe Casey and
Kenneth Hale
signing out.